Hello everyone. Welcome back to my writing analysis series. With Wednesday Season 2 just around the corner, even though we still don't have an official release date, I've been rewatching Season 1 and taking tons of notes. Today we're diving into one of the most polarizing characters in the series, Tyler Galvin, and all the questions surrounding him. Like, did he ever had feelings for Wednesday, or was he just manipulating her throughout the series? That's what we're going to try and address in this episode. Now, I'm a huge shipper of Tyler and Wednesday because honestly it just makes sense. Wednesday is an Addams, and Tyler, being a Hyde and an outcast among outcasts, fits perfectly into that family dynamic. Now, here's where things get really interesting. There's a theory floating around that Tyler might actually have D.I.D, also known as Dissociative Identity Disorder. Please keep in mind that I am not a mental health professional. This is just an analysis based on research. That said, it's fascinating to explore how the show might have unintentionally portrayed a very real psychological condition. I rewatched every episode to pick up on the hints of his split personality, and I'm excited to break down the evidence and chat about how this duality could shape his future arc, maybe even paving the way for a redemption story. Is Tyler's Hyde an actual supernatural force beyond his control? Or is it a psychological alter formed in response to trauma, making his story an unintentional but powerful metaphor for D.I.D? So if you're as intrigued as I am about Tyler's complex character, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's get into it. Oh, right now, Netflix doesn't always nail the depiction of mental health on screen. And if Tyler were to truly have D.I.D, also known as Dissociative Identity Disorder in our discussion, it would be ideal for the production to have a mental health consultant on set to ensure an accurate, sensitive portrayal. For those of you who aren't familiar, D.I.D, Dissociative Identity Disorder, is a complex mental health condition that usually develops as a coping mechanism in response to severe, prolonged trauma, often during early childhood. Essentially, the individual's mind creates two or more distinct identities or personality states as a way to compartmentalize overwhelming experiences. These identities can have their own unique patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Some common symptoms of D.I.D include memory gaps, periods of time that the person cannot recall, identity confusion, a sense of uncertainty about who they are, or experiencing shifts between different personality states, a depersonalization/derealization, feeling detached from oneself or the world, as if everything is unreal, a disruptions in daily life, difficulties in functioning, often because of the internal conflict between different identities. Accurately portraying D.I.D requires careful research and, ideally, collaboration with mental health professionals. A mental health consultant, the term for someone tasked with getting these depictions right on set, can help ensure that the portrayal is both respectful and grounded in the realities of the disorder. If Tyler's character were to be explored through the lens of D.I.D, it could open up an intriguing redemption arc, showing him struggling to reconcile these conflicting identities and perhaps ultimately working towards healing. What do you think? Could this approach give Tyler the depth and nuance he deserves? Now, since this is a writing analysis, it's important to consider the inspiration for the Hyde monster in Wednesday. The show didn't just pull this creature out of thin air. It's heavily influenced by one of the most famous literary depictions of duality, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This 1886 novella explores the dual nature of humanity through Dr. Henry Jekyll, a man who creates a potion that transforms him into the monstrous Mr. Hyde. Unlike Tyler, Jekyll knowingly experiments on himself, but over time he loses control, Hyde becomes stronger, and the distinction between them blurs. Sound familiar? Some interpretations of Jekyll and Hyde suggest it represents a psychiatric disorder involving multiple identities, but it's more accurately seen as an exploration of the internal struggle between good and evil. This is a key difference between Stevenson's story and the possibility of Tyler having dissociative identity disorder. Jekyll's transformation is a metaphor for unchecked desires, while D.I.D is a trauma-based condition where separate identities emerge as a coping mechanism. But here's where things get really interesting. In Wednesday, Tyler's transformation isn't just a gothic horror trope. It's tied directly to his trauma. We know from episode 8 that Miss Thornhill tortured him for days, using chemicals to force his Hyde to emerge. In Jekyll and Hyde, the transformation is triggered by a potion. In Wednesday, it's trauma and chemical inducement. Both cases show a split happening under external forces, but the show might be hinting at something deeper, something more psychological. So, was Wednesday just drawing from classic horror, or was it subtly suggesting that Tyler's Hyde form is a symptom of D.I.D? If the show leans more into the psychological aspect in future seasons, we could see Tyler's struggle not just as a fight against his monstrous nature, but as a battle to reclaim his identity. What do you think? Is Wednesday using the Jekyll and Hyde framework to suggest Tyler has D.I.D? Or is it all just supernatural? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Oh, now let's compare the symptoms of D.I.D to what we see Tyler do on screen, even if the plot is a bit bloated. I already made a video about how messy Wednesday's plotline is, so if you're curious, check out that list for more context. According to episode 7 of Wednesday, I can't show clips. Just go watch the series, especially episode 7. Faulkner's journal states, Hydes lay dormant inside certain people until they are unleashed by a traumatic event or unlocked through chemical inducement or hypnosis. They form strong bonds with their liberators, whom they see as their masters. In episode 8, Miss Thornhill subjected Tyler to days of torture in a cave, even administering a lethal drug. This extreme abuse could have triggered a survival mechanism in him, which I interpret as the physical manifestation of D.I.D. In other words, when Tyler couldn't cope with that prolonged torture, he developed another personality as a means to survive his condition. This transformation, the emergence of his Hyde persona, suggests that Tyler isn't acting out of pure malice or manipulation by choice. Instead, he's forced into this split by his traumatic experiences. It's important to note that some viewers dismiss his behavior as simple emotional manipulation. But if we consider the context, that he's essentially been enslaved by the force that unleashed his Hyde form, it complicates that judgment. He might not have had much of a choice in the matter, as his altered state is a direct response to the trauma he endured. In essence, while the show's plot may be cluttered, Tyler's split personality, or D.I.D, can be seen as a coping mechanism, a desperate, involuntary reaction to overwhelming abuse. This perspective opens up a more nuanced discussion about his character. Instead of labeling him solely as an emotional manipulator, we might also consider the possibility that he's battling a deeply ingrained trauma response, one that forces him into a role he never intended to play. What are your thoughts? Does this interpretation make Tyler's actions more sympathetic? Or do you think the series falls short in addressing his internal conflict? So let's break down the key moments that hint at Tyler having dissociative identity disorder, or D.I.D. Interestingly, we don't get the biggest clues from Tyler himself. Instead, they come from how others describe his behavior, especially his father, Sheriff Galpin, and Dr. Kinbott. Early signs of psychological distress. One of the first moments that stand out is the bathtub scene in episode 3. Tyler is completely submerged underwater, screaming. At first glance, this could just be him letting off steam, but considering the D.I.D. theory, this could be a sign of dissociation. People with D.I.D. often experience extreme emotional distress when switching between alters, and water can sometimes be used as a grounding technique. The memory gaps and personality shifts. Then there's the way Tyler reacts when Wednesday accuses him of being the Hyde. He never outright denies it. His responses are more confused, deflective, or avoidant. If he had D.I.D., this would make sense. His host personality might genuinely have no memory of what his Hyde alter has done. The biggest example of this comes in the confession scene in episode 8. Tyler shifts from the friendly, almost innocent persona we've seen throughout the show to someone entirely different, smirking, taunting, fully embracing the monster side of himself. The way he switches so effortlessly suggests this isn't just an act, it could be a complete personality shift. This raises an important question. Did Tyler's true self, his host personality, ever have real feelings for Wednesday? There are moments where his affection seems genuine, like when he smiles at her before their first kiss. But if he does have D.I.D., it's possible that his emotional connection to Wednesday was severed when his Hyde alter took over. If Tyler was switching between identities, was his real self ever truly in control? Sheriff Galpin's denial and repression. Then there's his father. Sheriff Galpin spends the whole show avoiding the subject of Tyler's mother, who was also a Hyde. He refuses to talk about her, and anytime the topic comes up, he shuts it down. If Tyler had D.I.D., his father's refusal to acknowledge it, and Tyler's own lack of awareness, could point to a history of suppressed trauma and psychological fragmentation. The biggest clue, Dr. Kinbott's files. But here's where it all comes together. The strongest piece of evidence for Tyler having D.I.D. doesn't come from his scenes at all. It comes from his father's. In one of Sheriff Galpin's scenes, he goes through Dr. Kinbott's files on Tyler and finds a tape recorder. In those recordings, Dr. Kinbott says that whenever she brought up Tyler's mother or certain sensitive topics, he would become a completely different person. That phrase is key. A completely different person suggests more than just mood swings. It hints at a full identity shift, which is exactly what happens in D.I.D. That's the moment where the show practically confirms that something deeper is going on with Tyler. It's not just that he was manipulated into becoming the Hyde, it's that he might not even be fully aware of everything he's done. Counterargument and rebuttal. Manipulation or did? Some viewers argue that Tyler's actions are entirely manipulative. They point to his confident assertions at the sheriff's station in episode 8, where he claims full awareness of his behavior, as proof that he's consciously controlling his actions rather than suffering from a trauma-induced split. According to this view, his deliberate tone and calculated responses suggest he's completely in control. But here's the thing. I don't think that's the whole story. Let's set the record straight. Tyler endures extreme abuse in two distinct scenes. First, Miss Thornhill drugs him in a cave, and later, Wednesday chains him and shocks him with a taser and a hammer. These brutal actions inflict severe physical and emotional trauma, setting the stage for a dissociative reaction. A key moment that underscores the emotional neglect in this narrative occurs during the scene with Xavier behind bars. In that moment, instead of showing any sensitivity toward Xavier's feelings, despite knowing he cares for her, Wednesday bluntly states that she and Tyler kissed. This callous remark exemplifies her lack of emotional awareness. It is precisely this emotional neglect that leaves Tyler isolated and vulnerable, contributing to the overwhelming stress that can trigger a dissociative split. Another critical moment happens when Tyler asks Wednesday, "How does it feel to lose?" In response, Wednesday's face briefly reveals genuine hurt, a rare glimpse of vulnerability from her typically detached demeanor. For that split second, Tyler reverts to the kind, sensitive version of himself that Wednesday once knew. This fleeting reversion indicates that his behavior isn't entirely a calculated act, but rather the result of an involuntary, trauma-induced shift in his identity. Did Tyler ever have feelings for Wednesday? Yes, I believe he did, at least at some point. Before Wednesday chained him in the shack and tortured him, Tyler's smiles and body language suggest he still saw her as a friend, maybe even something more. In the woods right before she knocks him out, he even smiles while leaning in for a kiss. That moment, before everything unraveled, suggests he genuinely wanted a relationship with her. But after the shack, everything changes. The physical and emotional trauma he endured there could have triggered the Hyde persona to take full control, effectively pushing any lingering feelings aside. If Wednesday hadn't resorted to torture, would things have played out differently? Maybe. How this supports the D.I.D. theory. A trauma-induced splitting. The extreme abuse Tyler suffers creates a perfect storm for a trauma response. Under such conditions, dissociation can occur as an involuntary means to compartmentalize overwhelming pain. Tyler's transformation into his Hyde persona appears more as a survival mechanism than a deliberate performance. Inconsistent emotional cues. Although Tyler's confident delivery at the sheriff's station might suggest full control, his behavior shifts dramatically. The moment when he asks Wednesday, "How does it feel to lose?" and sees genuine hurt in her eyes causes him to momentarily revert to his vulnerable self. This sudden change is a hallmark of a dissociative process, indicating that his shifts are not entirely under conscious control. If Tyler's Hyde alter is a response to trauma, does that mean he has no control at all? Or could he still experience moments of awareness within the shift? If the latter is true, then Tyler's story might not just be about whether he's a villain, it could be about whether he can fight his way back to him. Impact of emotional neglect. Wednesday's inability to register or appropriately respond to emotional cues, exemplified by her insensitive comment to Xavier, creates an environment where Tyler feels abandoned and misunderstood. This emotional neglect intensifies the stress and isolation he experiences, making it more likely for his mind to split as a way to cope with the overwhelming pain. So while some argue that Tyler is fully aware and consciously manipulating those around him, the combination of extreme abuse, involuntary trauma responses, and the emotionally neglectful environment, highlighted by Wednesday's callous remark to Xavier and her fleeting vulnerability when confronted by Tyler, strongly supports the theory that Tyler is suffering from D.I.D. His dissociative split appears to be an involuntary, survival-driven reaction to unbearable trauma and isolation. So what do you guys think? Did Tyler ever truly care for Wednesday, or was it all an act? Did Wednesday's actions push him over the edge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. So, based on the evidence, does Tyler Galpin have dissociative identity disorder? The answer is yes, at least the show strongly suggests it. Between his unexplained memory gaps, extreme personality shifts, and Dr. Kinbott's direct statement that he becomes a completely different person, there's more than enough reason to believe Tyler has D.I.D. Now the real question is, will Wednesday actually address this in future seasons? Will Netflix bring in a mental health consultant to make sure the portrayal is accurate? And perhaps most importantly, will Tyler get a redemption arc? Or is he doomed to be the monster the world sees him as? Who knows what Tim Burton has planned? If Wednesday fully commits to exploring this, Tyler's character could go from being just a villain to one of the most layered, complex figures in the show's history. A true redemption arc for a character like him would be groundbreaking. But do you think the show will go that route? Or will they double down on his villainy? Again, I'm not a mental health professional. This is just my analysis based on research. If you're interested in learning more about D.I.D., check out the resources I've linked in the description. So what do you guys think? Was Tyler just playing Wednesday all along, or did he actually care for her? And could he ever break free from his Hyde personality? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to dive deeper into Wednesday's messy plot and character arcs, click here for my analysis video. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.